class, welcome back, and we are headed to the deep end of the pool right now as far as cardiology, because we're going to start talking about the 12 lead, and more importantly, things that you need to know about a 12 lead, what it does, and how we get to fix things. I can't stress this enough. You're probably going to need to watch this 2-3 times, but not only watch it, but then go back and watch it again after we do some practice with it. Because I think that it'll make a lot more sense once we practice with this a little bit more and then what we're looking for. And I think it's a key thing. It's really important to understand that. And what we're going to talk about in this first video, there's several parts to this video series on 12 leads. And what I'm really going to focus on, matter of fact, I'm going to use several sets of slides in order to prove this. And make my argument to you as to why a 12 lead is an extremely diagnostic and very powerful tool for us to use in the pre-hospital setting. One in which that is sometimes overlooked, and I think that's very important to understand. So let's look at some of these things here. We're going to talk about all of these topics, by the way, as we go through this. And again, this is our normal electrical system. Hopefully you guys have got this down pat. And it's very important to understand this because of some of the topics that we're going to be talking about. And a couple things that I really want to definitely point out is, in this particular discussion, is the right and left bundles. And actually there is a third one that's going back off of the left bundle branch called the posterior branch. And you'll see that better when I put the Bob Page slides up so that you can see them and you will know the material a little bit better. But those right and bundle branch blocks, it seems to be a confusing part to students when it shouldn't be. Matter of fact, the part that's confusing is that I can't tell if this is actually ventricular tachycardia or if this is a bundle branch block. Well, I'm going to give you guys some really cool tools in order to tell the difference between the two. So, again, as a reminder of what an EKG is, it's a recording of the electrical heart activity. And again, the electrical current moving towards the positive electrode causes it to go up. And if it's going towards the negative electrode, it's going down. If it's moving away from the positive electrode, I should say, it causes a negative deflection. The stronger the current, the stronger the deflection. So remember, it's going to read only that which is the strongest electrode. And a good example of that would be when you've got an inverted T wave during your QRS complex. It reads the QRS because there's a lot more voltage that it can read versus what just the atria are doing. There's a lot more muscle, therefore you're going to get a stronger signal, which is why you get waves that are buried in those QRS complexes or buried maybe within a T wave that you can't see, simply because, again, the machine is designed to pick up the strongest electrical signal. Okay? Now, what do we use a 12 lead for? And I think this is kind of a really important point. I think the number one tool that we use it for is the determination of ventricular tachycardia. And you don't actually need that in order to determine that. But I think it's a wonderful tool that helps us determine that. It helps us determine different disease processes, whether it be a COPD patient that's got a enlarged right ventricle, whether it's a left axis deviation, which is caused because the guy does a lot of cardio and he's got an enlarged left heart, or if he's got an enlarged right atria. So there are little subtle findings that we can use to determine this. But the biggest one that we use it for in the pre-hospital setting is the determination of having an MI. And it's the determination of if the patient is having an ST elevation MI, which, again, it is our primary reason that we will put somebody on a 12 lead. But understand that a 12 lead shows us a lot more than that, okay? One other little point, a little sidebar about the STEMI. A 12 lead will show us that the person is having a heart attack. It will not, and I have to stress this very strongly, it does not mean that the person is not having a heart attack, okay? So if you're seeing ST elevation, you can look at the patient and go, yeah, you're having a heart attack. And if you're looking at, and again, there are some mimickers out there, which I'm going to show you the mimics, and it's okay. It's easy to find the mimickers, actually. But again, we can do this with relative certainty. A 12 lead, yep, you're having the heart attack, you're having the big one, versus, no, we're not having the big one. So again, this is just a reminder about the EKG recording. And we're going to be talking about the axes here in a minute. What direction is the current flowing in, okay? And that's what we're trying to determine when we're determining axis. And that's what helps us kind of define what disease process that they're having, okay? And I've stressed this to you guys, and by the way, this is, again, a wonderful slide that you should probably take a picture of, again, because simply putting it, this has got all the measurements in it and where they are as far as the measurements and how we measure things, okay? So it's very important to understand these concepts with the EKG right here. If you have not already learned this, I would highly make sure that you know this slide, because it's really going to come into play as we start doing the 12 leads. Now let's talk about the first 6 leads, though. Let's talk about the unipolar leads and the bipolar leads, and then we'll talk about the precordial leads. So your bipolar leads, leads 1, 2, and 3, okay? These are the ones that are on the very left of the EKG. The second row is the unipolars, AVR, AVL, AVF, and we're going to talk about the difference. And then the last one is the precordial leads. That's your V leads, V1 through V6. It can also include, by the way, V7, V8, V9, V3R, V4R, and V5R. We will get to those in a little bit. All right, so lead 1. Here we go, across. Goes across. Think of it from hand to hand, okay? Lead 2, from the right hand down to the left leg, all right? Lead 3, from the right arm down to the, left arm to the left leg. Left arm to left leg, not the right one. Right one's the lead 2. All right, and the reason that we, by the way, and then you've got your augmented leads, and that's where your AVL, that's what the A means in front of it, is augmented. What this does, guys, is it takes a midpoint in between these 2 electrodes and then reads to that electrode. So this is your kind of your negative is kind of in the center, your positive is out here. And this is the term augmented, all right? So your precordial leads, it does a cross-section look at the heart. So, and again, this one, if I was to take a piece of glass and go right down the middle of you, go in between your ears, slice you down the middle. That's what it's looking at, that plane, okay? This plane, I take a piece of glass and I go straight through your chest. That's what your precordial leads are looking at, okay? And so between the 2, I'm going to fast forward here a little bit because there's a lot better picture of it there. So again, this slice here is going up and down. The V1 through V6 are going horizontal and across. And between the 2, we get a pretty good picture of the heart, okay? So again, bipolar leads, augmented leads or unipolar leads, and then your precordial leads are right here. So again, V1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we'll learn about how those fit together. Now, back to this guy. So, remember, lead 1 goes across. Lead 2 goes from the negative to the positive. And the key one here is, and I can't stress this one enough also. So, sorry guys, just got some messing up here. Grabbed a pen. And it's very important to understand this because this is the way that the heart normally goes, okay? Now, it says 60 on here is a 60-degree angle. The 60 is probably more with the line that I drew. And the reason that I say that is because your normal physiological axis is 59, okay? That's a normal physiological axis for the human being. Now, it is different for every person. I'm talking about the standard person, all right? Which is why that and I've talked about this a little bit already in cardiology. That's why we monitor in lead 2, okay? That is why we do that. We monitor in lead 2 because it's as close to our physiological axis as possible. Now, with that being said, I will also tell you that it's great for telling arrhythmias, but there's one arrhythmia in particular that's actually probably a bad thing. But the good news is you guys are actually pretty good at reading it at this point. By the way, so your augmented leads, these are the angles that it takes to see the augmented leads, which is why this guy right here is, and I'm going to tell you, most of the time we don't look at this guy, okay? There is a very specific case where we will look at it, and I'll explain that as we get into it. But for the most part, very rarely do we actually use AVR to read anything. We're going to use this one and this one a whole lot, actually. So the hexaxial system is that semicircular system. And this is where that hexaxial system actually, what does that tell us, okay? The biggest thing that it's going to tell us, and it's the one that I stress so much, is if you've got a case of VTAC that is going on, okay? So, again, normal physiological axis, again, usually it's this guy right around here, okay? So, and by the way, so it starts on the left, goes to 0. Over here, by the way, is 180. Now, this is where everything gets kind of funny. So, there are certain systems that do minus 90, and there's also, you might see them out there that say 270. And this one, I will tell you, is kind of manufacturer based. So if you see these numbers, don't freak out about that. So basically, that's how they determine axis. Okay. Now the good news is, by the way, for some reason they always do 0 to minus 90 on this particular one. So they may go up to 270. Most of the time, it's 0, 90, 180, minus 90. Okay. Now, what this means, guys, is what it's reading from the heart. Okay. And that's the direction that it's reading from, okay? That's what it's actually telling us, all right? And again, normal is 60, all right, or the 59, all right? Normal is our 59, all right? Now, where this comes in extremely helpful, what happens, and by the way, on your 12 leads up top, they'll have that. They'll have a QRS axis. And that number is so very important. That when we start getting that reading and that readout number, now, can I actually figure this out based upon what directions these guys are going? Actually, yeah, you can. And it's kind of crazy about how they would do that. But the biggest thing is here, and we're going to talk about this area a whole lot, okay? Because that's the area we really need to be looking out for. Remember, if our SA node starts up here and it goes to the AV node and then it goes down into the heart muscle, okay, it's going to be that 59. But what happens if the signal, and I'm going to hit my eraser button here, if I can find my eraser button. One thing I've learned is that, there we go, pin. The one time I need my eraser up here, right? Oops, wrong one, guys. Pin. Let's see here, eraser. So, where I'm actually worried here is, what I truly am worried about is when I see a signal that's going up into this quadrant, okay? When I see a signal that's going up into this quadrant, anywhere between 180 and minus 90, I know that that is originating from the ventricle, okay? Because stop and think about it. If it's from the junction, guys, even if it's from the junction, your stronger axis is still going to go this direction, okay? But if it's coming from the ventricle, it's starting down here and moving that direction between 180 and minus 90. And we refer to that as no man's land. Or this set of slides calls it the indeterminate axis. I call it no man's land because it's really bad. Now, again, your precordial leads, we look across the heart. Again, don't forget, we got some leads out here as well. All of these leads that we do this way, we can also do on the right side of the heart. And we'll talk about this when we get into the different types of heart attacks. Because, again, one of the things I want you guys to really notice is this looks really good at the front part of the heart. It looks really good at the anterior part of the heart. It looks really good at the lateral wall of the heart. The other leads show us the inferior wall of the heart. Nothing really shows us the right ventricle. There's nothing showing us that. By the way, nothing's showing us the back of the heart, okay? So that's where those other leads come into play about diagnosing a patient having a heart attack. Now, again, the vectors, we talked about that real quick. I just described those. But what we're talking about, you might see these terms on the EKG, the normal axis, right axis deviation, left axis deviation, and the indeterminate axis, or no man's land. The other term we're going to use for that is extreme right axis deviation, okay? And again, if the signal's flowing from there anywhere over here, there's only one place, guys, that can start from. The only place that it can start is the ventricle, which is the reason that we use that to determine whether a person is in ventricular tachycardia. So this is our tool to tell that, all right? By the way, really healthy people may, or if they've got, let's say, congestive heart failure, they've got a really big left ventricle, it's going to take a lot more time for the signal to go through. You'll get some signal pointing in this direction, okay? So there's two types of left axis. There's physiological and there's pathological, okay? The physiological, we're really not worried about, okay? A lot of you guys are firefighters. I can pretty much guarantee you probably have a little bit of left axis deviation. It's just the way that you are conditioned, okay? Right axis deviation usually leads to there's some damage on the left side, or there's an enlarged left ventricle, at which point the signal, instead of going this direction, it kind of turns and heads in this direction, okay? So right axis deviation is usually an indication of a little bit of damage. Nothing major. Again, it helps us to determine things, but again, I know pretty much if I got a left or right axis deviation, more than likely it's coming still from the atria or the junction. If I have extreme right axis deviation, I know that it's from the ventricle, and again, we need to make sure that we treat it and treat it correctly. Okay, now do you actually need the number? You can determine it, by the way, you can determine it by the way that these are up and down, okay? You can determine the negative and positive and then determine its axis deviation. Let me be polite. Unless you're like a super geek, I don't want you to learn that. But I do want you to know what's left and right axis deviations, okay? But this chart can easily help you, and you're going to hear me refer to this a lot when we start talking about 12 leads and we're ruling out whether or not it's ventricular tachycardia. Normal, by the way, up, up, up. Bad, extreme right axis, otherwise known as VTAC, okay? If you got leads 1, 2, and 3, and they're all pointing down, that is VTAC, okay? Period. So, again, normal, we like normal, right? Everybody agrees we like normal. Up, up, up. Okay? Remember that if you're going to be turning left, right? If you're going to, and this is kind of a little bit backwards from what I'm going to teach you on the turn signal method, but your left axis deviation, usually 1 is up. So again, it's pointing towards the left for lead 1. Remember, lead 1 goes across, right? Lead 1 goes across the body, and it's still positive, but the other two are going to be pointing down. Right axis deviation, this is where this one gets kind of crazy. It's pointing down. Lead 1's going to be pointing down. Lead 3 is going to be pointing up, okay? So that's kind of the way I remember it. If it's, and I use my lead 3, again, if I'm going to be turning to the left, I pull it down. So I know that if I got a messed up thing here, pointing down, knowing that it's probably a left axis deviation. If it's pointing up, I know that it's a right axis deviation. That's the way I tell them apart. But the two rules here, guys, up, up, up is good. Down, down, down is bad, and I mean bad, bad, bad. Okay. So again, we already showed you this, and this is what it tells us. Our lead. Matter of fact, let's put that up, 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 down, down, down test to the test here. So lead 1 is up. By the way, in this one, lead 2 is up. Lead 3 is up. There you go. By the way, one little sidebar here. What this little part is right here. This is a calibration. It automatically sends this out. And that calibration should be pointing up. And it should be about 10 boxes, roughly. Okay? If you don't see that, you've got an issue with your machine and you should probably have that checked. Okay? So on all of your 12 leads, guys, you're going to see that calibration. Okay? So make sure that those little calibration bumps are there. Okay? And by the way, this is a sinus rhythm. As I'm looking at this 12 lead, again, I'm looking at these 12 up here. If I can get it to draw. Okay? Now, there are some 12 leads that may have 3 strips down here. Okay? Take a look here because this correlates actually with the machine and what it's taking. But these first three rows up here are my diagnostic rows, okay? If I'm looking at the actual strip, I'm looking at it down here, okay? Now, I will unfortunately tease you on this. When we start looking at some of the Bob Page stuff, he doesn't have any strip down below, okay? So, but in a normal 12 lead, they usually have the diagnostic strip as the 4th row, okay? So that you can tell exactly what rhythm this is, okay? Again, it's a regular rhythm. It's the P to P's are the same. The R's are the same. You need to use the box method here, 300, 150, 100, 75. We got a P wave. We got a QRS. We got a P wave for every QRS. This is sinus rhythm, okay? So remember that whole the whole R to R thing that I taught you guys about how many boxes in between? Yeah, this might be a good time to kind of revisit that. All right, so I know it was a little long, so I kind of explained some definitions and some basic input of what we were doing. And I'm going to see you guys on the next one, and we're going to start diving a lot more into the disease and what constitutes actually a STEMI alert. We'll see you then.